you doing, everybody? You're very welcome here. Just to let you know just a little bit about our thoughts on the book and maybe reflecting a little bit on 2016. 2016 is a year to remember and reflect. From the smallest county in Ireland, though, it should be remembered, County Louth produced men and women with the biggest hearts who wanted to fight for the freedom of their country. President Michael D. Higgins has said, in the past year, a special year of commemoration and reflection, we've been reminded of how precious our freedom is. We commemorated how 100 years ago, a small group of women and men who set in train a series of events that ultimately led to an independent state. We also reflected on aspects of our history that had been forgotten, evaded, or even downplayed. And the Louth Volunteers story and who they were has been, in our eyes, forgotten, evaded and downplayed by many, yet was an essential element of the 1916 plans outside of Dublin City. On today's date, this very date, 21st of December 1916, an amnesty for those interned in British prisons was announced for those Irish rebels who fought in 1916. So 100 years ago this week, and they were returning from Frongach this week from harsh, damp, rat-infested prison conditions. Frongach, as you know, is aptly named the University of Revolution. Now, when they returned, these people were far from broken or defeated. They were looking at moving things on to the next step. There are some who seek to diminish the Rising as just another event in a decade of events. It's far more than that. Owen McLaughlin, who has written the foreword to this book that you're holding in your hands, is a relative of Patrick Pearse, and we got him to write the foreword. But he has said on another occasion, somebody was saying that those who took part in the Easter Rising were a minority in a minority. This was intended to cast aspersions, perhaps, on the men and women who took a stand against the British Empire in 1916. That same somebody might also have asked, but did they have a mandate to embark on such drastic action? Well, to that person I would say, did the British Empire ever seek a mandate to colonise or to plunder the resources of Ireland, or indeed of half the world? The Louth Volunteers were given a difficult task by Patrick Pearse, yet persevered despite the odds being stacked against them. By May the 3rd, at the time some of the 1916 leaders were being executed, the Louth Volunteers were still out. They demobilised, they didn't surrender. We are so happy to see a book to do with the brave men and women of the Louth Volunteers published in 2016. The books are on sale today, are collector's items. We have another launch in January for the general public, just one or two little tweaks that we need to make, and we're going to be releasing to the general public in mid-January. The response to this has been phenomenal so far. It's been selling like hotcakes. Basically, Alan Bogan, we've all worked really, really well, but from the get-go has been the glue in terms of getting this project together. And he's done some great groundbreaking research, tracking down the names of those who mobilised in the area. This book focuses on the volunteer side of the story, which we felt wasn't being heard, or to those who did hear it, didn't wish to give it justice. The book we broke up into sections. Alan looked at the lead up to the Rising, I looked at Easter week, following the Louth Volunteers on their march, as well as what was happening in Dundalk and Dublin, and the story of Sean McEntee. And Porrick has done a fantastic job in the photo section with his mother Marie, who found photos that have never been put together before, as well as looking at the stories of the volunteers from after this historic week. So now we have a book which we completely financed ourselves. And we had to make this independently. We wanted to tell their story as they would have wished it to be told. So what did they achieve? There would be no Irish government, as imperfect as it is, if it wasn't for the action of ordinary men and women who went out that week, just like the Louth Volunteers. And to quote James Connolly Heron, the great-grandson of James Connolly, all of us are the beneficiaries of their sacrifice. Those who have held high office in this country in comfortable positions of power or privilege in this republic do so as a result of that cause and of that sacrifice. That freedom did not fall from the sky, and your relatives played their part in this happening. And not only that, they should be celebrated and remembered with pride, without apology, and with no royal seal of approval required. Remember this about the Louth Volunteers. The RIC and the press didn't know that they were out for a revolution. They presumed the Louth Volunteers were simply on a route march. There were those sympathetic to the cause in the Dundalk Post Office withholding messages to delay the RIC receiving important dispatches. County Louth Volunteers are one of the few areas in the country who were ignoring Owen McNeill's countermanding order as they saw Patrick Pearse as their leader as they proceeded on their long march. Remember, they commandeered rifles in RD, as well as making their own ammunition in the weeks leading up to the rising. Remember, they faced off over 50 RIC at Slane Bridge, taking one side of the bridge while the RIC took the other. Remember, they were sending dispatches to Dublin to authenticate the countermanding order. Remember, once a dispatch came to them telling them to go ahead with the rising, they immediately turned back for Dublin, taking command of cars along the way. They captured a number of RIC and the British officer. They engaged in a shooting in Castle Bellingham, killing one member of the RIC. They proceeded to Turlestown House and were so close to Dublin they could hear the sounds of rifle fire. They recuperated and drilled while Donal O'Hannigan, our commandant, tried to link up with Thomas Ash's Fingal Battalion, who were engaged in taking over RIC barracks in the famous Battle of Ashburn. The late Sean Cronin, in his published story of the Rising, said of those men and women, "None could consider them a hero, but all were heroes. There were 100 from Louth who were willing to challenge a colonial empire. The Louth Volunteers refused to live their lives as second-class citizens in their own land and set out with bicycles and rifles to challenge the might of the British Empire, where they were told the sun never set. They fought and risked their lives for Irish freedom. Your freedom, my freedom, our freedom, and that's what sets them apart." James Connolly himself, when he heard about the Louth Volunteers attempting to fulfil their mission, has been quoted as saying, "The brave men of Louth." Patrick Pearse has also spoken of the Louth Volunteers while in the GPO to motivate the Dublin Volunteers during Easter week. We've had numerous obstacles put in our way this year getting the story out, yet hopefully in the spirit of the Louth Volunteers we've done everything we could to overcome insurmountable challenges in getting our relative story out there. We have produced a documentary which has had over 5,000 views online, had a successful medal ceremony organised by Porrick, and marched both in Dundalk and Dublin on the historic April 24th of this year, which is a tradition I hope we continue. We have had a very successful magazine launch with Anne Campbell in the Argus. We've sold over 4,000 copies of that magazine, and now we've produced a book to honour the 1916 relatives. The people who were the Louth Volunteers should be the pride of place of in any local museum. The actions of those who went out in 1916, coupled with the unnecessary blood sacrifice of 49,000 Irish men who lost their lives in World War I, helped to stem Irish recruitment to fight for the British Empire. Talk of conscription was soon met with fierce resistance, as can be evidenced in the elections 2 years later with an overwhelming nationalist majority. 6 years after 1916 we had an Irish Free State. Remember that. I'll tell you what you can do to help us to conclude. Work together like our relatives did. Help us sell this book. Convince a local shop in the town to put out a few copies on their counter. Tell them you can buy it maybe in the Argus or maybe in the museum here. Get people talking about it. Ask bookshops why you aren't stocking it. And the reason that I'm asking you to do this is because of this. So the next time little Johnny or Mary in a school in history class asks what happened in County Louth and the teacher says not much, now little Johnny or Mary can slap that book on the table and say right back, actually, County Louth did an awful lot. Be as proud as James Connolly was of your relations, the brave men and women of County Louth. Thank you very much.